sponsored walk has today become a popular way of raising funds for charitable purposes, but perhaps less well known is the sponsored ride. Same idea, but the horses do the walking. This ride was organised by Cliviger Riding Club in aid of Riding for the Disabled, the RSPCA and club funds. The starting point was near Cliviger, and competitors arrived on foot, by trailer and horse box on a beautiful sunny morning in late July. The club's hard-working secretary took time off for a smoke. There were to be two separate rides, one of 12 miles, the other of 25. Horses and ponies of 3 years and upwards could compete in the shorter ride, and those of 4 years and upwards in the longer. There was to be no galloping, no use of spurs, and naturally, hard hats were compulsory. Some 56 riders took part, 17 of them taking the 25-mile course. The Duke of Lancaster's own yeomanry had volunteered, as an exercise in communications, to provide radio links between base and all the checkpoints along both routes, which were also manned by boys of the Air Training Corps. Every horse had to pass a strict veterinary inspection before being allowed to take part. Those horses whose shoes were suspect were passed on to the blacksmith for running repairs. And at last, the first group of 25-milers set out on their long trek. After climbing the hill on the south side of the valley, the route disappeared beneath the Burnley-Todmorden railway line. Some of the younger competitors in the 12-mile ride were now arriving, and the second group of 25-milers, led by club president Mrs. Townley, got underway. Fresh horses and eager riders set out in fine style, but 25 miles of rough terrain will soon put paid to that. After climbing the hill behind the Darnley Hall, the route passed Darnley Cottage on its way up towards Deerpley Moor and the first checkpoint, and the pace had already slowed to a more prudent walk. The route wound over Deerpley Moor, by the well-known Thieveley Pike, and over to desolate Heald Moor, where we picked up Group 1, making steady progress over the uneven turf. Meanwhile, Group 2 had reached the first checkpoint near Thieveley Pike, and the yeomanry were soon busy checking papers. And so on to the next stage of the journey. The third and last group of 25-milers had now reached Darnley Cottage. though some of them were straggling a bit. At this point, some rather mysterious changing of horses took place. And having sorted that out, the group carried on down the lane, through a farmyard, and up the steep hillside to Deerpley Moor. Group 2 had now reached Heald Moor, riding well and in close formation. Group 3, having passed the first checkpoint, followed. By this time, the first group of 12-mile riders were on their way. 4 riders who, shortly after this point, disappeared for a time. With almost 40 riders taking part in the 12-mile ride, following groups were larger, but all were eager to be on their way. 12 miles is a long way to lead a pony. The 12-mile ride followed the same route as far as the second checkpoint at Sharneyford, on the edge of Todmorden Moor. After a lovely morning, the weather was worsening considerably as riders arrived in force at checkpoint 2. Our erstwhile leaders were then spotted by a worried cameraman riding through the centre of Bacup. But they made it at last, and checked in, whilst the army reported that all was now well. From Sharneyford, the route went right over Todmorden Moor to Lower Moor, above the Cornholme Valley. Where anxious spectators awaited arrivals at checkpoint 3. down now into the valley to the halfway point of the 12-mile ride, where a compulsory stop of at least 15 minutes had to be made. Halfway House was just beyond the railway line at Portsmouth, and the sun made a welcome if short reappearance as refreshments were served. Back to the 25-mile ride, which now followed country so wild as to defeat even our intrepid cameramen, who picked up the trail again at a spot rejoicing in the name of Hades. Group 1 had, apparently, lost themselves on the moors and been rescued by Group 2, both groups arriving together at the Hades checkpoint. And so to the final leg of the outward journey, to the halfway stop near Wardle. The troops found a little diversion, and Group 3 followed close on the heels of the others. To make their final check before the welcome halfway break. At Mitchell's Farm, near Wardle, Groups 1 and 2 were taking their well-earned rest and refreshment. To be joined by Group 3, all the riders having now completed half the course. Preparations now began for the return journey. At this stage, Cliviger must have seemed a long way away. Two of the competitors felt they'd had enough and would return the easy way by trailer. The rest regrouped, and the first and largest party moved out for the long trek home. The remaining 6 riders then started to saddle up, anxious not to be too far behind at the finish. And were soon away, with some 13 miles of rugged countryside before them. The return route skirted the banks of Watergrove Reservoir. Some riders still found the energy to jump the odd fence. then settled down to a steady walk. But what of our 12-mile riders? Skirting the north side of the valley, they approached the main road and railway at Windy Bridge. The sun had now disappeared completely, and heavy rain clouds had gathered. They crossed to the south side of the valley, under the Army's watchful eye, and started the climb up the hillside to rejoin the outward route at checkpoint 1, from where they were soon within sight of the finish. The early ones just made it before the rain, which had been threatening, finally arrived. In spite of the rain, at least one horse didn't want to go home. Meanwhile, the 25-milers, who had left Wardle in warm sunshine, were heading for the Sharneyford checkpoint and a downpour. Checking-in formalities were cut to a minimum, the group obviously anxious to be on their way. The downpour had become torrential as the last group approached, and caused one horse to bolt with its rider. Clad in summer attire, the riders must have been very uncomfortable, and this time checking was forgotten in the hurry to get home. Another changing of mounts following the bolting, and then off on the last long stretch of the return journey. Back over an even more desolate Heald Moor, back over Deerpley Moor and checkpoint 1. The rain had eased off as the first group came down Dineley Lane and into the home stretch. And finally to the finishing line, wet, tired, but still cheerful. The last of the 12-milers were still coming in. And after a fast run over Deerpley Moor, the last group came down the hill at a cracking pace, with complete disdain for the 25 grueling miles they had put behind them. Sponsor lists were checked in with Club Secretary Joan Duxbury, and then it was how quickly one could get home for a good rub down for the horse and a hot bath for the rider. Even the rain, which had provided an additional hazard to add to the excitement, had helped to make this a day to remember for all who took part. A day to remember, too, for the beneficiaries. After providing the rosettes presented to all who completed the course, over £250 was raised, a very worthy effort by riders and horses alike.